So we have Valerie Martin here. She is the 2010 Louisiana Writer Award recipient and the author of, is it 11 or 12 novels? Is it 12 with Mrs. Gulliver? 12. Okay, 12 novels. 4 collections of short fiction and a biography of St. Francis of Assisi titled Salvation. She has been awarded grants from the National Endowment for the Arts and the John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship, as well as the Kafka Prize for Mary Reilly and Britain's Orange Prize for Property. Valerie Martin's appearance was made possible in part by a strategic partnership grant from the Louisiana Endowment for the Humanities. So welcome, Valerie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So I have another little announcement about you that I'm going to ask you about. You recently donated your personal papers, boxes and boxes, to the State Library, and they include some unpublished novels and handwritten manuscripts. So can you tell us about your decision to do that and what someone might find in there?
Yeah, it was a lot of boxes. I think it was maybe 30. Can you hear me? Maybe 30 or so bankers' boxes. I was about to move to California. I had been asked by someone who sells papers some years earlier if I wanted to place them, and at that time it was March 13th, 2021 that they were supposed to go look at him, and that was the day that New York closed because of COVID. So nothing happened for a while, and then after COVID was over and I tried to get back in touch with the people again, it turned out that the guy who was doing the sales was arrested for fraud. So that possibility went out the window. And then I was just kind of looking around for someplace to leave them. I didn't want to destroy them. As you said, there's several manuscripts of unpublished books. I keep a lot of paper, a lot of letters, a lot of correspondence, a lot of contracts. I always keep my contracts. So I thought it would be good to have them somewhere where if somebody wanted to look at them, they could. And I was talking to Jim and realized he has a library. So I asked him if he would want them, and he was very quick to say that he would. And so I just started sending them FedEx pickups of 3 or 4 or 5 boxes. I don't really know what's in some of those boxes, but there they are. They're in the library, and they're going to organize them, and it's a collection that's will stay there in my name. So it was great. Jim made me feel like he was honored to have them, and that was really good for my ego.
He was very excited about it, and I think you joined 2 other people who've done that. So I mean, you're one of 3 in the library's collection. So
yeah.
It's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he does want to build a bigger collection and have this library be a repository for a lot of Louisiana writers. I think it's a great idea.
Right. I think so too. I'm looking forward to going dig through them.
No.
Yes, I want to. Okay. Well, your latest novel, which came out in February, is titled Mrs. Gulliver. And it's about a woman named Lila Gulliver who runs a high-end brothel on Verona Island, and she ends up employing a blind girl. And so would you read for us
I will.
A little bit from the opening to that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You have to. Oh, you don't have the book?
No, I didn't. Oh, okay, we can't do that.
We won't be doing
Sorry,
that.
I didn't even think about that. I was thinking it was in your purse. Yay, all right.
Do the rest, you. Yeah, this is my new book, Mrs. Gulliver. It's really great looking. I love the cover.
It's such a pretty color.
Yeah, it's quite a color. It stands out on the shelves. So this takes place on Verona Island. I wanted to write a book that didn't take place anywhere in the real world, but was like the real world, and it takes place in the 50s, which I remember. And the island, anyone will notice right away, is a lot like New Orleans, but it's not like New Orleans, but it's tropical, and there's a lot of lizards. And the voice is Mrs. Gulliver. Our clients are professionals, doctors, lawyers, bankers, politicians. We've served a few mayors over the years. And because our city is wrapped around the largest port on the island, a steady supply of seagoing men, my rule is officers only. Discretion is what we offer. Except for the address and wrought iron numbers, the front door is unmarked and never used. Clients enter via a side door behind a tall hedge, so it can't be seen from the street. A password is required at all times. As the password doesn't change, this is the mildest of security measures. Our clients are encouraged to share it with interested friends and acquaintances. It creates a kind of network with a charm of inclusion in a select society. Boys love passwords. In the last few years, bad weather and blight have played havoc with the local economy, particularly among the rice farmers on the windward side of the island. A few of their prettiest daughters have made their way to the city seeking honest labor, and failing that, turned up at my door. But by that time, they're desperate, hungry, and frightened, and their best option is a charity organization run by nuns in a little town up in the hills. I refer them there. I've taken one or two to work, but they're seldom up to my standard for the house. Occasionally, my sympathy overrules my judgment, and I employ a girl who presents what I know to be a challenge. This may be shrewdness on my part, as I would not have been successful in my business were it not for a sixth sense I have about some quality in an applicant that will appeal to certain of my clients. Carità was such a girl. That summer morning, a hot, humid day with rain, as usual in the forecast, my major domo Brutus, aptly named, came to my office, which is also the kitchen, and planted himself squarely in the doorframe. "There's an odd couple asking to see you in the drawing room," he announced. "I don't know what they want. They look like beggars, but they know the password." "Did you tell them we don't open until noon?" "They're country girls, Lila." He said, "They're looking for employment, is my guess." I rose from the table. "And how did they get the password?" I mused. Brutus stepped aside, and I sauntered down the hall. They sat facing each other, one in a leather chair, the other perched on the edge of the red silk-upholstered divan, her back straight and sandaled feet drawn in. They were dressed in plain cotton sleeveless shifts that came to the calf, worn and clean. Two destitute girls, one fair and portly, the other an elfin creature, small-boned, emaciated, but not boyish. Even in her unflattering dress, I could see she had a shapely figure, long waist, full breasts, excellent posture. That's always the first thing I notice. Her hair was an uncombed, thick black mop that fell to the center of her back and partially covered her face. The blonde looked up as I entered, her innocent face flushed with hope. Her friend didn't move, her head slightly bowed and turned away from me. "How do you come to know the password here?" I asked sharply. "My uncle gave it to me," she said. "His name was Peter Rizzo. He said you might not remember him because he only came here once with a friend." "Who was the friend?" "I don't know that," the girl replied. "It was when he came to town. He was a rice farmer, or he was until the blight came. Now he's dead, and the bank took the farm." "Where are your parents?" I asked. "Our parents are dead," she said candidly, with no more emphasis than you might use to make a trivial factual observation. For example, "That door is closed." "So, you're sisters," I observed, "and you've come to the city looking for work." "That's right," she said. "My name is Valerie Bercy, and this is Carità. I've already got a job. I'm signed up to shuck oysters at the market restaurant on the wharf. The man there showed me how it's done and then gave me a test, and right off he said I was faster than the two boys he'd got put together." "Good for you," I said. "That shows enterprise." "Yes, ma'am," she said, "but Carità won't do that kind of work. So now I need to find a place for her because I can't leave her on her own, and I won't make enough for us both. My uncle said he thought she might be useful to you." At this, her dark sister chuckled. "That's not exactly how he put it, Bessie," she said. Her voice, deep and breathy, vibrated through my chest like a cat purring in my lap. As she spoke, she turned towards me, and I could make out through the screen of her hair her eyes, half closed, very light. What he said, she continued, was that I'd be better off here than with the goddamn lesbian nuns. How can I describe the rich velvet of her voice? She could have been a countess or an actress, delivering a scene-clinching line. There was an archness as well, distant and amused, deflecting the crudeness of the information she had just so succinctly passed along. She made me smile in spite of myself. "Carità," her sister said, "don't talk like that." I don't think Mrs. Gulliver is shocked, the girl replied. Again, the deep vibration and archness of tone caressed my ears. Would you push your hair back so I can see your face, I said. She pressed her palms against her temples, pulling back the curtain of hair. I caught my breath. Her face was beautiful, a creamy complexion with a natural blush like an English beauty, her nose straight, her lips full and soft, her chin squarish and firm. But it was her eyes that startled me, heavy-lidded and half-closed, with thick, dark lashes and irises like blue glass, the perfectly translucent blue of a glacier. Beneath the dark bird wings of her brows, her eyes glittered enchantingly. I studied her. Something was very odd about those eyes. She's 19 years old, Bessie said. Carità inclined her head toward her sister's voice, but the eyes didn't move. She's blind from birth.
So, Kirkus called Mrs. Gulliver a funny, sexy romp, but it's much more than that. Can you tell us about your Romeo and Juliet inspiration for this, and how your blind girl came to be?
Yeah, the epigram is from Romeo and Juliet. I was rereading Romeo and Juliet. I had watched the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, which was set in Verona Beach, Florida, and I thought, what a clever idea. And I was thinking about the fact that Shakespeare makes it very clear that Juliet is 14 years old and that her father has basically put her up for sale to the highest bidder. And her response to that is very, very negative. And, basically she goes to a party and sees a cute guy. And by the next day, she's married. So I thought that she's really strong-willed. She was not very happy about being for sale, and the whole idea of a character in that situation kind of appealed to me. I wanted to see what I could do with a Juliet who was very fierce and who didn't suffer fools lightly. So that was where that notion came in. And then at the time, I had a blind student in a writing class, and she was born blind, and she was a good writer and just an amazing young woman. She was the most willful person I've ever met. I guess she had to be, and so I began to think of her as my Juliet, because there wasn't anything she couldn't do. She rode horses, she skied, and she, was determined to be very, very independent. She fell down the flight of stairs at one of the colleges and just, got up and kept going. She was interesting and she had a great sense of humor as well. So I kind of was pushing these two ideas together, the idea of a young girl who's for sale, who's blind, who's really willful and determined to get out from under.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that Verona Island is, somewhat based on New Orleans, and that's where you were raised, and you got your bachelor's from the University of New Orleans. So, how has the city influenced your work overall?
I think it's in everything, really. I was thinking today about that. My first 3 books were pretty much set in New Orleans pretty clearly. And then the 4th one was short stories, most of which were set in New Orleans. And during that time, I had graduated from college and I was working at the welfare department. And then I went to graduate school and I stopped writing about New Orleans for a while. But I think that the sort of atmosphere that I grew up in, it's in a lot of my books. I have done a lot of historical fiction, in which case I really had to leave the city behind. I was writing about Victorian London. I recently wrote a book that takes place leading up to the war in World War II in Italy. I wrote a book that takes place about a ghost ship that disappeared, and so it starts out in Massachusetts, where I lived for a long time, so I know something about that. So some of the books don't have that, but I do think that peculiar kind of ironic view of life and the possibilities of human relationships that New Orleanians have is one I can't shake, and so I feel like when I go out into the world, I can't not see it in that way. And so I would say that New Orleans is always with me.
Yeah. Well, and you've said that you write by hand, especially when you're beginning a project. So how does that process work? And I mean, do you have a regular writing practice at all?
I used to. The last few years have been very disruptive, and I've moved recently. But I'm hoping to settle down and get back to the usual thing, which is I get up in the morning, I write in my notebook, I just write a complaint about my life, and then I try to turn to whatever project I'm working on. Every time I've written historical fiction, I have vowed I will never do it again, because the research is just really exhausting. It's a bit easier now because of computers, but I still really like to go to the library and, find that book that, in some cases, I found books that I couldn't find through searches on the internet, mostly because they're mislabeled. So I wrote this book in a way so that I wouldn't have to do any research, because I was just going to make the world up out of, scratch. It's really a fantastic world of my own creation. And then I started casting around for a new project, and wouldn't you know, I read about this woman who stabbed a guy on the steps of the Astor Hotel in 1840 in Manhattan, and I started poking around in there, and so now I'm back.
Now you're researching again.
Yeah.
That sounds interesting, though. Okay, we'll get back to that toward the end. Okay, so while you were a writer in residence at the University of Alabama, you lived in the same neighborhood as Margaret Atwood. And so would you mind telling us your personal story about reading The Handmaid's Tale before it was published and how that experience changed your career?
Yeah, that was the most serendipitous experience. I went to teach for 1 year at University of Alabama because a woman who's now a close friend divorced her husband, and he had to leave. It was a horrible public divorce. Guns were involved. This was, a long time ago. So I was teaching at UNO, and somebody who was also there remembered that I was at UNO, so they asked me if I would come teach there for 1 year to fill in until they were able to replace this guy. It was kind of insulting, but it paid well. So I went. And that same year, Margaret Atwood had agreed to take, they had a chair, which was a new chair, and she would be paid very highly to teach one class, and so she came. And we lived in the same neighborhood. Our daughters were the same age. I think Jess is a year younger than my daughter. So we became friends, and she was, I think that was her fifth or sixth book, so she was pretty well known, but nothing like what was about to happen. And she was working on a book as I was. She read my book, I read her book. She brought me an envelope one day and said, "Read this." And it was The Handmaid's Tale in a typescript. So I read it, and then there's two versions of what happened next. That is, she said what came to me and said, "What do you think of it?" She says that what I said was, "I think there's something in it." But I know that what I said was, "You're going to be rich." And I was right.
You were right.
Yeah, I was right. And then my publishing career has been star-crossed, and she has several times come. Basically, when she left Alabama, I had 3 unpublished novels. She took them and gave them to her editor, Nan Talese, who was my editor for 30 years. So she really made my career possible.
Yeah. Do you keep in touch with her?
Oh, yeah. I had an email from her the other day. Yeah, she's up in the north of Canada working on a memoir.
Oh, okay.
And she told me, I've reached the point in the memoir where you appear in your swirly flowered skirts. Now, I don't think I ever wore swirly flowered skirts.
Oh, in her mind, you did.
Yes, and so I did.
Right. Yeah.
She's an amazing person. She's a really generous and confident person.
Yeah. Well, out of your now 12 novels, do you have a favorite?
Yeah, I don't. They're all just so wonderful.
They're also
I do, and I don't. I wrote one from the point of view of a man. Actually, I've written two from the point of view of a man, and that was fun. And it was about an actor, and it's kind of a double. It's two actors, and they look a bit alike, and one of them almost drowns, and the other one saves him, and so he owes him his life. But they wind up competing for the same parts. It takes place in the 70s in Manhattan. So I spent a lot of time doing the research with actors, and I went to actor studio. I went backstage at a couple of theaters. I got to go into the dressing rooms, got to see rehearsals, what they call tech rehearsals. So I really got into the whole New York acting scene. I lived an hour away, so I could do it. And that book, which is called Confessions of Edward Day, was really a lot of fun. I think it's one of my favorites. And then I really like The Ghost of the Mary Celeste, which is about a ghost ship. Again, the research was really interesting, and Arthur Conan Doyle appears in it, so I got to make little stabs at Arthur Conan Doyle.
And you said that was about a story your father told you, or that you had talked about with your dad?
Yeah, my dad was a sea captain, and I read about this ghost ship, which was called the Mary Celeste. It disappeared in 1872, I think. The ship did not disappear. The ship actually was found empty and sailed to Geneva. But the crew of the ship, it was the small crew, was gone, and nobody knows why, because there was nothing wrong with the ship. So that's been a great mystery for many years and never solved. I read about it in like the Weekly Reader at school, and I went home, and it was one of those rare times when my dad was home, and I told him about it, and he knew all about it.
See, so you've gone back and forth between writing novels and short stories over the years. I have Sea Lovers up here, but how is your process different for those, and do you prefer one over the other?
Well, I like to write short stories a lot because they're shorter. So I can start one and write it in a couple of months, and that's a nice feeling. But then, it's not a book, so you got to write 12 more. So it's essentially writing short stories is sort of always writing a collection, whereas writing a novel, you're going to be in the same world for a year or so, maybe two. It can take a long time, and so the daily, there's no suspense. You know what you're going to be doing next. Be trying to push the novel on. I tend to write novels from page one to the end. Some people, write different parts or jump ahead or something.
Do you make an outline?
No.
Okay.
A lot of times I don't know where I'm going, which may be why some people really don't like my endings, because I didn't know. I mean, Margaret Atwood really gets on me about that. How can you write a book if you don't know the ending? She starts with the ending. But no, I like to kind of feel my way and let things go, as I realize what the character would do in a situation. Sometimes I do know the end. I can't say if that's more successful or not. But it's pretty pleasurable experience once I get in a novel and I think, okay, I'm in this now. I'm going to go to the end. Then I know what I'm doing for the next year. So it's no suspense.
Yeah, just short stories sometimes feel like a little break in between.
They can, yeah. And sometimes when things aren't going well.
Okay.
I'll start a story. I've been working on a collection of stories about people who go on trips and bad things happen, like they get killed, or they almost get killed. So all the stories are thematically related. They're all about travelers, and those have been a lot of fun. I've only got 3 more to do.
That does sound fun, yeah. What advice would you give to any aspiring writers who are in the audience?
That's really hard. But I was thinking about that. I've taught for years, and I'll have a class of 12 students, and I would say after the second round, I can tell which ones will go on. and which ones won't. It really is kind of I think it's a disposition that you have or you don't have. And I guess my advice to them is simple. Think about why you want to do this, not if you want to do it. What makes you want to do it? Why? So Margaret Atwood wrote a book called Negotiating with the Dead, and it's a wonderful book of lectures about writing. And one of the things she does at the beginning of it is gather from everybody that she can the answer to the question, why did you write? So if you want to know the answer, you can look at that. And the range is huge. It's things like because I want to be rich and famous, because I want to work at home, because I have a story inside me that needs to get out, because I want to hang out with other writers, because I want to be recognized on the street. I mean, it goes, it's like 4 pages. So everybody's got a different reason. But I think it's good to know what it is you want from it. Because some people really just want recognition, and that's really hard to get. And if you don't get any pleasure out of the process, then sort of what's the point? So I think it would be to ask yourself, why do I want to do this, and do I like to do this? Or because there are a lot of writers who don't like it, and they talk about how horrible it is and what torture it is. And I think nobody's making you do this. It is tiresome sometimes. I mean, you have to be alone a lot. That's another thing. Do you like to be alone a lot? That would be a good.
Yeah, true.
That would be a good question.
Well, I mean, you've had Mary Reilly and Property, which have done pretty well, and Mary Reilly was even made into a film, which I know you don't love, but.
And I love that director, Stephen Frears. It's the worst movie he ever made.
Okay, don't watch it.
Don't watch it. It's awful. Julia Roberts cannot act. You heard it here.
You heard it here. But then sometimes, your books are, not as well received or not as well reviewed. But I guess you just keep going because there's something inside you.
Yeah, I have had some luck in England, and so I tend to have a bigger audience there than here. I won a prize there, so that's sort of, which I have not done here. So it is nice to have that other audience. And a few of my books were translated into, Mary Reilly was translated into 14 languages, so that looked like, my star has risen, and now all I have to do is keep writing books. But
right.
It turned out that it doesn't work right. I mean, I make a living, so it's okay. I'm not complaining.
Well, okay. You mentioned the project about the woman stabbed in New York. But what? So you're working on that, and what else are you working on next? What can you tell us about?
Yeah. A friend of mine, it's a writer, Amy Bloom, gave me the title because I was talking to her about it. Do any of you know the story, Bartleby the Scrivener?
Oh, okay.
Oh, I'm so happy. Okay, so I think my book is going to be called Bartleby the Murderer. Because I started, I taught that story for years and years. You may have, if you were my student, you read it. I'm not even sure why I love it so much. And I've always taught it as a story about a character who realizes that he's on a boat, and he realizes that somebody's sinking, and he tries to pull him out, and then he realizes they're going to pull him in. Right? So that desperate effort to help someone who won't be helped or can't be helped, that's what this story is about. But the other day I was thinking about it, I was reading about Melville's career, which was kind of like mine. He never really sold well, and he died poor. Actually, I've done better than he did. And he was such a strange character. And he wrote that story was one of the last stories that he wrote. And, he always wrote about going to sea and adventures. And why, towards the end of his life, did he write about Wall Street and this character who basically starves himself to death and won't be helped by the helpful lawyer? So I thought, why does Bartleby do that? And I realized I had always focused on the narrator and not on who he was and what could have happened to him. And then I decided one day, what if Bartleby was his son? And a light went on. I wrote to my agent. I've sent my agent like 6 ideas for a new novel, and she's gone, I'm underwhelmed. And I sent this, and she said yes. So now I have to do the research. So I
was about to say, yeah, now you got to research.
Now I got to do the research. So I did a little bit of research, and I came across this woman who is an interesting and true case. She stabbed a man on the steps of the Astor Hotel in 1843, and she was tried. He accused her, of attacking him, and the story came out that he had seduced her. She had had 2 abortions and a child by him, and then he just threw her off. He didn't want to have anything to do with her. He told her to go be a prostitute if she needed money.
Sounds like she was justified.
Yeah, and she was a farm girl from Pennsylvania, and she couldn't read or write, so she was just thrown on her own resources. And there were a lot of foundling homes in Manhattan at that time. I didn't realize that, and most of the women who were giving their babies up were people who were in domestic service. So I thought, this young woman was working in John Jacob Astor's house, because the narrator of Bartleby the Scrivener can't stop talking about how he knows John Jacob Astor, right? So if she was working in John Jacob Astor's house and one of his guests got her pregnant and then disappeared, she would wind up in this foundling home. So then I thought, what would happen to the child?
Okay.
And I decided that's going to be.
Oh.
It's going to be Bartleby. So
okay.
Now you know the plot, and I know the end, which is really good.
Okay. Yes, that's some really good inside information.
Yes. Now you know. You don't have to read the book.
No, you still have to read the book. Well, I think we have plenty of time for questions.
Or not.
Okay, over here.
Yes.
I have one. It's kind of a cheeky question, though. I couldn't put together the idea that you give 30 boxes, factory boxes, to the state library of your collection. So, is the state library going to be extremely wealthy in the future when they find that second draft of Margaret Atwood's ending?
I don't have that.
You returned it.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, she took it back. No, I wish I did. No, if I had that, I certainly wouldn't be giving it to the state. No, but there's, it's only my papers, and there's some letters between her and me.
That would be
in there, but no, I didn't have that draft. I should have Xeroxed it. In those days, I would have had. There wasn't a Xerox.
No.
I would have had to. God, how do we make copies? I used, carbon paper. Remember carbon paper? Yeah, I know some of you do. Yeah, mimeograph machine. Remember that? Yeah, I lived through all the technology. Yes?
Hi, thank you for all this. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, your voices in your books are so distinctive, and I'm wondering, Valerie, how you arrive at the view. Is it just instinctive that you write in the voice that you choose, or do you make some choices that are more straightforward?
Yeah. It's a good question, the question of voice, and I think about it a lot, and more so now than I used to. I didn't really understand. My first few books probably were first-person books. Yeah, they were. The first one was a young woman, and the second one was a man. And I was thinking of them as characters rather than voices. But since you're writing in the first person, you're creating a voice, And what has happened and always happens is I just am mulling around with the story and I come up with a sentence, and it's usually the first sentence of the book, and then, I'll try this way and that way, and I'll think, no, that's not right, and then I'll just hear it. And it is it's kind of a chilling sensation when I think, oh, that's her, or that's him. That's what they're going to sound like. So I'll give you an example. I've probably spent several months now trying to hear this voice for Bartleby the murderer. And I've been doing research and reading about these foundling homes, and I wrote a few sentences in a book. One of them was about a sentence in which the narrator is making a judgment on the lawyer who he's going to work for, and he says he only hears his own voice, and he hears it constantly, and it tells him that he's right. So I started to have that notion, and then I was reading that a lot of the foundlings were what they called half orphans, because they had one parent still alive but couldn't afford to keep them. So they would be visited by a parent, which is, I think, is going to happen with this character. And so then I wrote a sentence that was something like, most of us are what they call half orphans, meaning one parent isn't alive or is absent, as good as dead, and that's usually the father, something like that. So just with those two, I began to think, well, that this is this aggrieved voice of someone who wants to get even. That's going to tell the story, and then I feel like I'm stumbling into the voice, and usually after a few pages, I can get back into it. Mary Riley was a wonderful one, because that voice was coming in really loud and strong. And I guess the easiest one, sadly enough, was Property, which is a bitter, hateful voice of a slave owner who hates everything about her life. And the first sentence of that book is, "It never ends," which, is something my mother used to say all the time, because she didn't like things. She would say, "It never ends." Right? So I don't know if that explains it, but it's kind of how it works. It's a little bit mysterious. Gotcha.
Anybody else? That's a hard question to follow, though.
Try to make a 5-minute answerable question. You taught us a little bit about research and the difficulty of doing research for your historical fiction. I guess I'm wondering if there are any particularly rich veins of that kind of detail that you need to write to embody your characters in the past.
Yeah, for historical fiction, I really try to find diaries and letters, and they can be very hard to find. For Mary Riley, I went to the big British library, and I said, I'd like to find some diaries or letters of working women. This very snooty woman said, "Well, I'm afraid we can't help you because they would have been illiterate." Well, it turns out they weren't. Wouldn't you know?
No.
Wouldn't you know? And I did find some amazing diaries, and I found them at a book table in South Hadley, Massachusetts. It was a book of a 19th century lawyer, and he had a maid, and she could read and write, and he had her keep a diary for him. They later married, actually, although they kept it secret because she didn't want to be a lady. It was a wonderful, fascinating voice. Her voice kind of is the voice that became Mary Riley. So I look around for first-person voices. With which book was it? I guess it must have been. Yeah, it was Property. I was looking in the Vassar Library in New York for books that might have to do with rice plantations and sugar plantations in Louisiana during the 1840s or so. You wouldn't expect to find that there, but there was some books about the economy and stuff. And in there was one that the title was something like Economy and blah blah on a Louisiana plantation. And I pulled it out, I opened it up, and it was the diaries of a guy down the river who, you know, it was like everyday entries about his interactions with slaves and how, what a burden they were. And there was nothing in the book, in the card catalog, or anything to suggest that this was anything but some kind of dry economic subject. So it just jumped into my hand. It was just, I was like, yes.
Okay. 1 minute. Anybody got a quick question? Okay, we'll wrap up then. Thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you. Good to see you.